Most people don't think their dating life is broken at first. They think it's just quiet, inactive, paused. Something they'll come back to once they fix a few other things, once they get in better shape, once work calms down, once they feel more confident, once life feels a little more stable. And then years pass. Not dramatically, quietly. Nothing explodes, nothing collapses. Dating just stays in the background, slowly turning into something heavier than it should be. Not because nothing is happening, but because the longer nothing happens, the more meaning you assign to it. Silence starts to feel like judgment. That's usually when people start looking for answers. Not real answers, but explanations that give shape to the discomfort. Something external they can point to. Something to blame. Dating apps, algorithms, society, modern culture. And none of those explanations are wrong. They're just incomplete, because even if the system is broken, you still have to live inside it. We live in a time where connection has been abstracted, packaged, optimized, reduced to profiles and prompts and pictures taken from the right angle under the right lighting. You're told this is efficient, that it saves time, that it increases your chances, but what it really does is remove context. And context is where attraction actually lives. In Minecraft, if you strip away terrain and flatten everything into a grid, the world becomes easier to navigate, but it also becomes empty. There's nothing to stumble into. Nothing unexpected, nothing that surprises you. Dating apps do the same thing. They remove friction, but friction is where chemistry forms. So people spend hours scrolling through faces that technically meet their criteria and feel nothing. Or worse, they feel something briefly, only to watch it disappear the moment reality intrudes. And after enough of that, they stop trusting the feeling altogether. Dating starts to feel transactional, statistical, like something you either succeed at or fail at based on variables you don't fully understand. That's when people say dating is broken. But what's actually broken is the relationship people have with the process itself. Most dating advice assumes you need to add something. Better photos, better lines, better habits, better confidence. But very few people ask whether dating feels unnatural because you're engaging with it in a way humans were never meant to. You're asking yourself to evaluate dozens of strangers based on fragments. You're asking your nervous system to treat constant rejection as neutral. You're asking attraction to behave logically. None of that aligns with how people actually connect. So the first thing to understand if you want to fix your dating life is this. You are not failing at dating. You're reacting normally to an unnatural environment. The problem isn't that you're undesirable. The problem is that desire doesn't survive well when it's filtered, ranked, and compared endlessly. When you have the illusion of infinite options, nothing feels valuable. When nothing feels valuable, you don't invest. When you don't invest, nothing grows. And when nothing grows, you assume something is wrong with you. That loop destroys motivation quietly. You stop trying in real life because the apps exist. And you keep using the apps because real life feels harder now. You outsource risk to a screen and call it convenience. And over time, you forget that discomfort was always part of attraction. That nervousness was never a bug. The celebrated, it was the signal that something mattered. Before apps, dating required presence. You had to notice someone. Be noticed, speak. Risk misreading the moment, risk rejection without the option to unmatch and disappear. That wasn't efficient, but it was human. Now efficiency has replaced humanity. And the strange thing is that even people who get dates from apps often feel unsatisfied. They go out, talk, they sit across from someone who looks like their photos and still feel detached. Like they're evaluating rather than experiencing. Like the date is a test run instead of a moment. Why? That's because attraction doesn't come from curation. It comes from exposure, from seeing someone move through the world, from tone, timing, presence. Things that don't translate through a profile. This is why so many people feel burned out by dating even when they're technically active. They're doing the motions without the substance, swiping without connection, talking without curiosity, meeting without openness. Fixing your dating life starts by recognizing that exhaustion isn't a sign to quit, it's a sign to change how you're engaging. When you were younger, most people don't need better tactics. They need a different relationship to dating altogether. They need to stop treating it like a marketplace and start treating it like a byproduct of living, because dating was never meant to be the main activity. It was meant to emerge from life. from shared spaces, shared rhythms, shared environments. When those disappear, dating becomes artificial. And artificial systems always benefit someone other than the user. So if dating feels empty, mechanical, or hopeless, that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're trying to find something real in a system that rewards surface level engagement. And that realization matters, because once you see that, you stop blaming yourself. And when you stop blaming yourself, you can actually start changing things, not by forcing outcomes, not by grinding harder, but by reconnecting with the parts of dating that were never supposed to be optimized in the first place. Trying harder is usually the thing that makes dating worse, even though it feels like the responsible response. When something isn't working, effort feels virtuous. It feels like progress. It feels like you're at least doing something. So people double down. They swipe more. They message more. They analyze more. They consume more advice. They turn dating into a project that needs managing. And slowly, almost without noticing, they turn themselves into someone who is constantly watching their own behavior instead of living it. That self-surveillance is exhausting. You're never just in a moment. You're evaluating the moment while it's happening. Did that joke land? Was that too much? Was that too little? Should I wait longer? Should I respond now? What does this mean? And the moment stops being a moment, it becomes data. Attraction doesn't survive that environment. Not because people don't like effort, but because attraction needs looseness. It needs a sense that something is unfolding naturally rather than being engineered. When someone feels like they're part of a process instead of a shared experience, they pull back, even if they can't explain why. This is one of the most frustrating parts of modern dating. The advice tells you to be intentional, to know what you want, to communicate clearly, to show interest. All of that is true in isolation, but when it's layered on top of anxiety and scarcity, it turns into pressure. And pressure kills curiosity. Curiosity is the engine of connection. It's what keeps conversations alive. It's what makes people lean in. And curiosity disappears the moment you start treating dating like something you need to succeed at. In Minecraft, if you load into a world with a strict plan already in your head, you miss half of what's there. You're not responding to the terrain. You're imposing something on it, and when the terrain doesn't cooperate, you get frustrated. You blame the world instead of the plan. Dating is similar. When you enter interactions with a script about how things should go, you stop responding to the person in front of you, you're responding to expectations. And people can feel when they're being measured against an idea rather than met as they are. This is why so many conversations feel flat even when they're polite and technically fine. Both people are performing versions of themselves that they think are acceptable. Nobody's fully present, nobody's taking small risks, nobody is actually curious. Fixing your dating life means interrupting that pattern. It means allowing yourself to be slightly unpolished, slightly unsure, slightly human, not because it's strategic, but because it's real. And real is the only thing that cuts through the noise. A lot of people are afraid of being boring, so they overcompensate. They entertain, they perform, they keep the energy high. But constant stimulation isn't connection. It's distraction. Connection comes from shared attention, not constant novelty. When you slow down, conversations deepen. When you stop trying to impress, you start noticing. When you stop narrating yourself, you become more responsive. And responsiveness is far more engaging than rehearsed confidence. Another thing that quietly breaks dating lives is the way rejection is interpreted. Most people don't experience rejection as a single event. They experience it as confirmation of a story they already believe about themselves. So one unanswered message becomes evidence. One awkward date becomes proof. One mismatch becomes a pattern. But rejection in dating is not diagnostic. It doesn't tell you what's wrong with you. It tells you what didn't align in that specific context. And context matters more than people think. Timing, emotional availability, life circumstances, mood. All of these play a role and none of them are under your control. When you internalize rejection as identity, you become cautious. You hedge. You protect yourself from feeling that way again. And protection looks like distance. It looks like irony. It looks like detachment, which feels safe but also blocks connection. Fixing your dating life means letting rejection be what it is. A moment that didn't work. Not a verdict, not a lesson you have to extract immediately. Just information that doesn't need interpretation. This is difficult because the mind hates ambiguity. It wants explanations. It wants closure. But most dating interactions don't end with clean answers. They end with silence, with fading energy, with nothing dramatic enough to justify how disappointing it feels. And that's okay. Not everything that ends needs to teach you something. Sometimes things end because they weren't meant to continue, not because someone failed. Another trap people fall into is waiting to feel confident before they act. Confidence gets treated like a prerequisite, but it's actually a consequence. You don't feel confident, then act. You act, survive the uncertainty, and confidence follows. If you wait to feel ready, you'll stay stuck in preparation forever. Preparation feels productive, but it keeps you safe from exposure. And exposure is where growth happens. In Minecraft, you don't wait until you're perfectly geared to explore. You explore to get geared. Dating works the same way. You don't become confident and then connect. You connect imperfectly, and confidence grows out of that experience. This doesn't mean forcing yourself into situations you hate. It means allowing yourself to engage without demanding perfection, to show up without guaranteeing success, to speak without rehearsing every word. Fixing your dating life is less about learning what to say and more about learning to tolerate not knowing how things will go. That tolerance changes your energy. You stop gripping interactions too tightly. You stop trying to secure outcomes. You stop needing reassurance at every step. And when that need fades, people feel more at ease around you. Ease is attractive, not because it signals status or dominance, but because it signals safety. It tells the other person they don't need to perform either, that they can be present instead of impressive. And when both people drop the performance, something real can happen. Most people are starved for that kind of interaction. They don't say it out loud, but they feel it. They're tired of curated selves and optimized conversations. They want something that feels grounded. Fixing your dating life means becoming someone who can offer that grounded presence. Not by changing who you are, but by removing the layers of anxiety and expectation that have been sitting on top of you. And once those layers start to fall away, dating stops feeling like something you have to fix and starts feeling like something you can move through. Not quickly, not perfectly, but honestly. And honesty, even when it's quiet, has a way of finding its way to the right places. One of the most overlooked reasons dating feels broken is that people are trying to fix it without changing the environments they live in. They want different outcomes while moving through the same routines, the same spaces, the same habits that quietly isolate them. So they end up blaming themselves for something that is, at least in part, environmental. Connection doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens where lives overlap. When your days are structured in a way that minimizes overlap with other people, dating becomes abstract. It turns into something you think about rather than something you experience. And the longer that gap exists, the more intimidating real connection feels because it's no longer familiar. It's theoretical. This is why so many people feel confident talking online but tense in person. They've trained themselves to interact through layers, screens, text, time delays. The body never gets involved. There's no nervous system feedback, no eye contact, no shared physical space. So when real life shows up, it feels overwhelming. Fixing your dating life doesn't start with confidence. It starts with exposure. Not dramatic exposure, not forcing yourself into uncomfortable situations for the sake of growth, but gentle, repeated exposure to being around people without an agenda, being seen without performing. In Minecraft, the world feels empty until you move through it. Not because nothing exists, but because nothing activates until you're present. Villages don't matter if you never visit them. Paths don't form if you never walk them. Dating works the same way. Possibility exists, but only where you show up. A lot of people think exposure means approaching strangers with the goal of attraction. That's not where it starts. It starts with inhabiting spaces where interaction is normal, where conversation doesn't need justification, where talking isn't a disruption. When you spend time in places where people linger, something shifts. Coffee shops where people sit instead of rushing out, gyms where people train consistently, classes, clubs, shared hobbies, routines that put the same faces in front of you repeatedly. These environments soften interaction. They make it familiar before it becomes personal. Familiarity is underrated. It lowers stakes. It reduces pressure. It makes conversation feel less like a leap and more like a step. Dating apps remove familiarity and replace it with intensity. You're expected to jump straight to interest without context. That's why it feels exhausting. Real life gives you context first. Glances, small talk, repetition, gradual recognition. Attraction has room to form naturally instead of being demanded immediately. Fixing your dating life means shifting your focus from outcomes to conditions. You don't need to convince anyone of anything. You need to put yourself in conditions where a connection can happen without force. This also changes how rejection feels. When interaction is part of a broader social environment, a single moment carries less weight. It doesn't define you. It doesn't feel like the only chance, it's just one interaction among many. Scarcity magnifies fear. Abundance softens it. And abundance doesn't mean endless options on a screen. It means regular exposure to real people in real spaces. It means your social world isn't compressed into one channel. Another thing people struggle with is a belief that they need to become someone else to be attractive, that they need to adopt a certain personality, tone, or lifestyle. But most of that pressure comes from comparing yourself to curated versions of others rather than actual humans. In real environments, people are less polished, more distracted, more imperfect, and that's a relief. You don't have to compete with a highlight reel. You just have to be present. Presence is powerful because it's rare. Most people are half elsewhere, on their phones, in their heads, preoccupied. When you give someone your full attention without trying to impress them, it stands out, not loudly, quietly. And quiet things tend to last longer. Fixing your dating life also means rebuilding tolerance for awkwardness, not eliminating it, letting it exist without interpreting it as failure. Awkwardness is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is real. When two people are figuring each other out, there will be pauses, misreads, small stumbles. That's not chemistry failing, that's chemistry forming. Only performances are smooth all the time. The more you allow awkward moments to pass without rushing to fix them, the more relaxed you become, and relaxation creates space for authenticity. Another quiet shift happens when you stop treating every interaction as a potential relationship. When you remove that weight, conversations become lighter. You're no longer asking, could this be something, before you've even asked, do I enjoy this? Enjoyment is the real compass. Not potential, not promise, not fantasy. How you feel in someone's presence matters more than how they look on paper. Fixing your dating life means trusting that compass again, letting yourself be guided by ease rather than expectation, by curiosity rather than pressure. And this requires patience. Not passive patience, active patience. The kind where you keep showing up to life without demanding immediate returns. In Minecraft, you don't see progress every minute. Sometimes you wander for a long time without finding anything notable, and then suddenly you stumble into something unexpected. A village, a structure, a view you didn't plan for. Dating unfolds like that. Not linearly, not predictably, but meaningfully. The mistake is quitting during the wandering because it feels unproductive. Wandering is part of the process. It's how you learn the terrain. Fixing your dating life isn't about speed. It's about rhythm. Finding a pace that allows you to stay open without burning out, engaged without obsession, hopeful without desperation. And once you find that rhythm, dating stops feeling like a problem you need to solve and starts feeling like something that moves alongside you, something that happens while you're living, not something you pause your life to chase. That's when it begins to feel possible again. Eventually, if you stay with this long enough, you reach a quieter understanding. Not an epiphany, not a breakthrough, just a steady realization that nothing dramatic was ever required. Dating didn't need to be conquered. It needed to be returned to the right size. Most of the pain people carry around dating comes from making it bigger than it is. Bigger than a conversation, bigger than a moment, bigger than a single connection between two people who happen to cross paths. When dating becomes a referendum on your worth, your future, your identity, it becomes impossible to approach without fear. And fear distorts everything it touches. So fixing your dating life in the deepest sense means shrinking it back down, not minimizing its importance, but restoring proportion. Letting dating be one part of a life instead of the axis everything spins around. This is where trust comes in. Not trust that things will work out exactly how you want, but trust that you can handle whatever happens. Trust that disappointment won't destroy you. Trust that rejection won't define you. Trust that you don't need constant forward motion to be okay. When you trust yourself like that, you stop racing. You stop entering interactions with armor already on. You become softer, not weaker, but more permeable. And permeability is what allows connection to pass through you instead of bouncing off. People often mistake this for detachment. They think letting go means caring less. But it's the opposite. It's caring without clinging. It's allowing interest to exist without immediately trying to secure it. It's letting attraction breathe instead of interrogating it. In Minecraft, when you stop obsessing over progression, you don't stop progressing. You just stop noticing it every second. You build things without checking them against a goal. You explore without tracking distance. And somehow, over time, the world fills in around you. Progress happens in the background. Dating is like that. When you stop watching the clock, time starts working in your favor. Another shift happens when you stop trying to extract certainty from other people, when you no longer need them to tell you how they feel immediately, when you don't need reassurance to stay present, when you can sit with ambiguity without trying to resolve it. Ambiguity is uncomfortable, but it's also honest. Most early connections exist in a gray space. They're undefined because they're forming. Trying to force definition too early collapses that space before it's had time to reveal anything real. Fixing your dating life means learning to live in that gray space without panicking, to let things be unfinished, to let curiosity replace control. This is also where self-respect quietly returns. Not the performative kind, not the kind that comes from rules or posturing, but the kind that comes from staying aligned with yourself. You stop chasing people who don't meet you halfway. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to earn interest. Not because you're bitter, because you're grounded. If you're lasting 7, we'll tell you, we can better pay for it, and if you're well-med, you're very far. Grounded people don't need to prove their value. They know when something fits and when it doesn't. And that knowing isn't loud, it's calm. It's the absence of urgency. Fixing your dating life isn't about becoming fearless. Fear doesn't disappear, it just stops running the show. You still feel nerves, you still feel hope, you still feel disappointment, but those feelings pass through instead of taking over. And when dating stops dominating your inner world, it becomes easier to show up honestly. You're not trying to win. You're not trying to avoid loss. You're just present. Presence changes how people experience you. It makes conversations feel fuller. It makes silence less awkward. It makes connection feel mutual instead of extracted. Most people don't want perfection. They want relief. Relief from performance. Relief from pressure. Relief from feeling like they're being evaluated. When you bring presence instead of strategy, you offer that relief without saying a word. That's when things start to shift. Not dramatically, quietly. You start having better conversations. Not because you're saying better things, but because you're listening. You start feeling more at ease. Not because outcomes improve immediately, but because your nervous system isn't constantly on alert. You start trusting yourself more. Not because dating suddenly works, but because you realize you don't disappear when it doesn't. Dating becomes something you participate in, not something you fix. Something that moves alongside your life instead of sitting above it like a judgment. And when you reach that place, the irony reveals itself. The moment you stop trying to fix your dating life is often the moment it begins to feel workable again. Not because you've cracked a code, but because you've removed the weight that was crushing it. You don't need to overhaul yourself. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to make dating your project. You just need to stay open to real people in real places at a pace you can sustain. That's it. Everything else is noise.